This is the time of year in which we hunters begin to look at our trail cams and hope to see those 8, 10, 12-point bucks in full velvet, where we go to great lengths, hanging little bits of rope from trees, planting or tending food plots, doing everything we can to make sure that we'll have a chance at harvesting that big buck during the hunting season. I'm reading a book that was recommended to me by Bishop Eric Varden. It's called The Shattering of Loneliness. Beautiful book on the spiritual life and the human condition and our need for God. And I want to share with you, I'll have to go back to the pulpit for a moment. I want to share with you something that he quotes in this book. And it struck me, and I've been fascinated by it ever since. I read it a few weeks ago. This Bishop Eric Varden is a bishop from Scandinavia, where the church, of course, is very small. There aren't many Catholics in that part of the world. And he's actually a Trappist monk and abbot who Pope Francis a few years ago named to be a bishop in this part of the world. From what I can tell, due to his brilliance and his holiness and his great insight into the spiritual life. And he's quoting someone in this book whom I would never have heard of. It's a playwright by the name of Stig Dagerman, poet, novelist, critic, Swedish man who took his own life at the age of 31 in 1954. And for some reason, Bishop Varden came across this author, this poet and playwright, and he quotes this line in his book. And this is the poet he's quoting. He says, "I lack faith, and for that reason can never be a happy man. I stalk comfort like a hunter stalks his prey. Wherever I glimpse it in the woods, I shoot. More often than not, I hit nothing but air. Though sometimes a kill plops down at my feet. Since I know that the constancy of comfort is no greater than the winds in the crown of a tree, I make haste to devour my victim." Wow. Not exactly the care that a hunter takes. Go to great lengths to be as prepared as we can. It's a beautiful image. I hope you got that. What I hear in that is that when we as human beings seek for comfort, we do it without much thought. It's our natural human condition. We want to seek comfort and avoid pain. We want the things that are pleasant. We want to avoid the things that are unpleasant. But all too often, we seek it without thinking about it, right? It's like going into the woods, the opposite of the hunters I was talking about at the beginning, and just wildly aiming. We're just always seeking comfort. And then some of the time, when we put the gun to our shoulder or draw back the arrow and let it fly, every once in a while we get it, don't we? And like the poet said, it plops at our feet, and because we know that comfort, as soon as we have it, it can go away again, we consume it. We just do this over and over and over again. But what he says is so amazing is because I don't have faith, because I'm not a man of faith, that is why I do this. That is why I do this. The Lord, as he always does, gives us the right way to think about this way that we are as human beings. He calls us to embrace the cross. As he is preparing to embrace the cross, and it makes his disciples afraid, it fills them with dread. They try to convince him not to do it, not to go to the cross. Interesting that we actually celebrate today, September 14th, although not on this Sunday. We celebrate the Feast of the Holy Cross. And then September 15th, tomorrow, is the Feast of Our Lady of Sorrows, that the Mother of God stayed faithful to her son all the way to the foot of the cross, and she suffered there bloodlessly, but suffered there in the same way her son did. And this scandalizes his followers. This scandalizes even Peter, who a moment ago gave that perfect declaration of what it is to have faith. You are the Christ. You are the Son of God. You are the Holy One of God. But when presented with the cross, when presented with the possibility of suffering, I just want comfort. I settle back into that desire for comfort, that aimless, careless, thoughtless search for comfort. But the Lord doesn't let him get away with it. Peter was fortunate, right, that the Lord was there when he said that so that he could immediately correct him. What the poet was talking about in that quote and what we experience in our lives is very often the Lord is not there when we seek comfort and it plops at our feet and we consume it right away. The Lord is not, there's not immediate feedback always, but there is feedback at some point. If we continue to pursue that life of comfort, if we just seek to avoid pain and obtain pleasant things and comfort, we know this is not a path to freedom. We can sense that in ourselves. And that's what probably tormented this poet that Bishop Varden is quoting in that beautiful book. But then we're again left with the question, if that is our condition, isn't it right to still avoid pain and seek comfort? Well, it can be. And here's where I'd like to offer a way to take this into the real world, into the everyday lives of all of us. A couple of ways to determine, is it right for me to seek comfort here, to actually take aim and be a good hunter for comfort, or am I just being aimless? One way to know if we're seeking legitimate comfort is if the Lord prompts us to do it. If we have someone in our life who's suffering, or maybe we've been diagnosed with an illness or whatever it might be, clearly the Lord wants health and not sickness. If we're in financial hardship, clearly the Lord wants us to find peace and to have a stable, well-ordered life where we have our basic needs. We hear that in the Epistle of St. James in the second reading today. People need basic human necessities. But when we find ourselves pursuing something apart from God, apart from checking in with Him through prayer, should I make this purchase? Should I go on this vacation? Is it right for my children to start their 7th extracurricular activity of the year? Right? If we do these things without care and without thought and without prudence apart from the Lord, that's when we know, okay, we're just aimlessly seeking comfort, and we might be avoiding the cross. Another way to determine it is connected to the first, of course, because the love of God and the love of neighbor are the same love from the heart of Jesus in us, is if my comfort seeking puts me at odds with anyone else, if my seeking my own interests harms someone else or crowds out room in my heart for someone else, particularly someone I have an obligation to care for, spouse, child, godchild, friend in need. If I'm seeking my comfort and I'm seeking a path of ease and it's isolating me from people who I have an obligation to care for, that's a good sign. That's a place where I'm seeking my own comfort and perhaps avoiding the cross. And I think the last thing to seek, the last way to know if we're seeking comforts that aren't legitimate, is if we find ourselves really spent. This is like the Lord saying to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You've become a stumbling block to me. If I sense that my life has run dry, if it's hard to pray, if I'm distracted all the time, if I am not seeking to nourish my faith, if I've even stopped going to Mass or stopped going to confession regularly, if I haven't read the Scriptures in a long time, because these are the places where the Lord is going to speak to us and remind us that only in embracing the cross will we find that true peace and true freedom. Only there can we be rescued.